By noon, feeling somewhat strengthened and refreshing, we again renewed our attempt at getting up provision. Peters and myself going down alternately, and always with more or less success until sundown. During this interval, we had the good fortune to bring out altogether with 4 more small jars of olives, another ham, a carboy containing nearly 3 gallons of excellent Cape Madeira wine, and what gave us still more delight, a small tortoise of the Galapagos breed, several of which had been taken on board by Captain Barnard as the Grampus was leaving port from the schooner Mary Pitts, just returned from a sealing voyage in the Pacific. In a subsequent portion of this narrative, I should have frequent occasion to mention the species of tortoise is found principally, as most of my readers know, in the group of islands called the Galapagos, which indeed derive their name from the animal, the Spanish Galapago, meaning of freshwater terrapin. From the peculiarity of their shape and action, they have been sometimes called the elephant tortoise. They are frequently found of an enormous size. I have myself seen several which would weigh from 12 to 1,500 pounds, although I do not remember that any navigator speaks of having seen them weighing more than 800. Their appearance is singular and even disgusting. Their steps are very slow, measured, and heavy, and their bodies being carried about a foot from the ground. Their neck is long and exceedingly slender, from about 18 inches to 2 feet to its very common length. And I killed one, where the distance from the shoulder to the extremity of the head was no less than 3 feet 10 inches. The head has a striking resemblance to that of a serpent. They can exist without food for an almost incredible length of time. Instances have been known where they have been thrown into the hold of a vessel and lain 2 years without nourishment of any kind. Being as fat and in every respect and as good order as the expiration of that time as when they were put in. In one particular, these extraordinary animals bear a resemblance to the dromedary or camel of the desert. In a bag at the root of the neck, they carried with them a constant supply of water. In some instances, upon killing them after a year's full deprivation of all nourishment, as much as 3 gallons of perfectly sweet and fresh water to be found in their bags. Their food is chiefly wild parsley, celery, purslane, sea kelp, and prickly pears, upon which the latter vegetable they thrive wonderfully, a great quantity of it being usually found on the hillsides near the shore, wherever the animal itself is discovered. They are excellent and highly nutritious food, and have, no doubt, been the means of preserving the lives of thousands of seamen employed in the whale fishery and other pursuits in the Pacific. The one which we had the good fortune to bring up from the storeroom was not of a large size, weighing probably 65 or 70 pounds. It was a female in excellent condition, being exceedingly fat and having more than a quart of limpid and sweet water in its back. This was indeed a treasure, and falling on our knees with one accord, we returned fervent thanks to God for so seasonable a relief. We had great difficulty in getting the animal up through the opening, as its struggles were fierce and its strength prodigious. It was upon the point of making its escape from Peter's grasp when slipping back into the water, when Augustus, throwing a rope with a slip knot around his throat, held it up in this manner until I jumped into the hole by the side of Peter's and assisted him in lifting it out. The water we drew carefully from the bag into the jug, which it will be remembered had been brought up before from the cabin. Having done this, we broke off the neck of a bottle so as to form with the cork of a kind of glass, holding not quite half a gill. We each then drank one of these measures in full, and resolved to limit ourselves to this quantity per day, as long as it should hold out. During the last 2 or 3 days, the weather having been dry and pleasant, the bedding we had obtained from the cabin, as well as our clothing, had become thoroughly dry, so that we passed this night, that of the 23rd, in comparatively comfort, enjoying a tranquil repose after having supped plentifully on olives and ham, with a small allowance of the wine. Being afraid of losing some of the stores all overboard during the night, in the event of a breeze springing up, we secured them as well as possible with cordage to the fragments of the windlass. Our tortoise, which we were anxious to preserve alive as long as we could, we threw on his back, and otherwise carefully fastened. July 24th. This morning we saw wonderfully recruited in spirits and strength. Notwithstanding the perilous situation in which we were still placed, ignorant of our position, although certainly at a great distance from land, without more food than would allow us for a fortnight, even with great care, almost entirely without water, and floating at about every mercy of every wind and waving on the nearest wreck in the world, still the infinitely more terrible distresses and dangers from which we had so lately and so providentially been delivered caused us to regard what we now endured as but little more than ordinary evil, so strictly imperative is either good or ill. At sunrise we were preparing to renew our attempts at getting up something from the storeroom when a smart shower coming on with some lightning, we turned our attention to catching the water by means of a sheet we had used before for this purpose. We had no other means of collecting the rain than by holding the sheet spread out with one of the 4-chain plates in the middle of it. The water, thus conducted to the center, was drained through into our jug. We had nearly filled it in this manner when a heavy squall coming on from the northward, obliged us to desist as the hulk began once more to roll so violently so that we could no longer keep our feet. We now went forward and, lashing ourselves securely to the remnant of the windlass as before, awaited the event with far more calmness than could have been anticipated, as would have been imagined possible under the circumstances. At noon the wind freshened into a 2-reef breeze, and by night into a stiff gale, accompanied with a tremendously heavy swell. Experience having taught us, however, that the best method of arranging our lashings, we weathered this dreary night in tolerable security, although thoroughly drenched at almost every instant by the sea, and in momentary dread of being washed off. Fortunately, the weather was so warm as to render the water rather grateful than otherwise. July 25th. This morning the gale had diminished to a mere 10-knot breeze, and the sea had gone down with it to so considerably that we were able to keep ourselves dry upon the deck. To our great grief, however, we found that 2 jars of our olives, as well as the whole of our ham, had been washed overboard, in spite of the careful manner in which they had been fastened. We determined not to kill the tortoise as of yet, and contented ourselves with for the present with a breakfast on a few of the olives, and a measure of water each, which latter we mixed half and half with wine, finding great relief and strength from the mixture, without the distressing intoxication which had ensued upon drinking the port. The sea was still far too rough for the renewal of our efforts at getting up provision from the storeroom. Several articles of no importance to us in our present situation floated up through the opening during the day and were immediately washed overboard. We also now observed that the hulk lay more along than ever, so that even we could not stand an instant without lashing ourselves. On this account, we passed a gloomy and uncomfortable day. At noon, the sun appeared to be nearly vertical, and we had no doubt that we had been driven down by the long succession of northward and northwesterly winds in the near vicinity of the equator. Toward evening, we saw several sharks, and were somewhat alarmed by the audacious manner in which an enormously large one approached us. At one time, a lurch throwing the deck very far beneath the water, the monster actually swam in upon us, floundering for some moments just over the companion hatch, and striking Peters violently with his tail. A heavy sea at length hurled him overboard, and much to our relief. In moderate weather, we might have easily captured him. July 26th. This morning, the wind having greatly abated and the sea not being very rough, we determined to renew our exertions in the storeroom. After a great deal of hard labor during the whole day, we found that nothing further was to be expected for this quarter, the partitions of the room having been stowed during the night, and its contents swept into the hold. This discovery has maybe supposed filled us with despair. July 27th. The sea nearly smooth with a light wind and still from the northward and westward, the sun coming out hotly in the afternoon. We occupied ourselves in drying our clothes. Found great relief from thirst and much comfort otherwise by bathing in the sea. In this, however, we were forced to use great caution, being afraid of sharks, several of which we were seen swimming around the brig during the day. July 28th. Good weather still. The brig now began to lie along so alarmingly so that we feared she would eventually roll bottom up. Prepared ourselves as well as we could for this emergency, lashing our tortoise, water jug, and our 2 remaining jars of olives as far as possible over to the windward, placing them outside the hull below the main chains. The sea very smooth all day, with little or no wind. July 29th. A continuance of the same weather, Augustus' wounded arm began to evince symptoms of mortification. He complained of drowsiness and excessive thirst, but no acute pain. Nothing could be done for his relief beyond rubbing his wounds with a little bit of vinegar from the olives, and from this no benefit seemed to be experienced. We did everything in our power for his comfort and trebled his allowance of water. July 30th. An excessively hot day with no wind. An enormous shark kept close by the hull during the whole of the forenoon. We made several unsuccessful attempts to capture him by means of a noose. Augustus much worse, and evidently seeking as much from want of proper nourishment as from the effects of his wounds. He constantly prayed to be released from his sufferings, which for nothing but death. This evening we ate the last of our olives and found the water in the jug so putrid that we could not swallow it at all without the addition of wine. Determined to kill our tortoise in the morning. July 31st. After a night of excessive anxiety and fatigue owing to the position of the hulk, we set about killing and cutting up our tortoise. He proved to be much smaller than we supposed, although in good condition. The whole meat about him not amounting to more than 10 pounds. With the view of preserving a portion of this as long as possible, we cut it into 5 pieces and filled with them our remaining olive jars and the wine bottle, all of which had been kept, pouring in afterward the vinegar from the olives. In this manner, we put away 3 pounds of the tortoise, intending not to touch it until we consumed the rest. We concluded to restrict ourselves to about 4 ounces of the meat per day, and the whole would last us 13 days. A brisk shower with severe thunder and lightning came about dusk, but lasted so short a time that we only succeeded in catching about half a pint of water. The short a time we had only succeeded in catching the whole of this by common consent was given to Augustus, who now appeared to be in the last extremity. He drank the water from the sheet as we caught it, we holding it above him as he lay so as to run it into his mouth, for we had now nothing left capable of holding water, unless we had chosen to empty out our wine from the carboy or the stale water from the jug. Either of these expedients would have been resorted to had the shower lasted. The sufferer seemed to derive but little benefit from the drought. His arm was completely black from the wrist to the shoulder, and his feet were like ice. We expected every moment to see him breathe his last. He was frightfully emaciated, so much so that although he weighed 127 pounds upon his leaving Nantucket, he now did not weigh more than 40 or 50 at the farthest. His eyes were sunk so far in his head, being scarcely perceptible, and the skin of his cheeks hung so loosely as to prevent his masticating any food or even swallowing any liquid without great difficulty.